They were just ordinary people. But what they saw was anything but ordinary. They don't all agree on what it was, but they all agree on one thing. It wasn't human. These are their stories. First-hand encounters with something they can't explain. Something they believe was Bigfoot. I'm posting this on behalf of my grandparents. They're both in their 70s now and still live in Southern Oregon. I grew up hearing this story in bits and pieces, usually during family gatherings over the holidays or on quiet nights. But it wasn't until recently, when I asked about it again, that I realized just how deeply it stayed with them. My grandpa has spent the last 15 years researching everything he can about Bigfoot and strange disappearances in the region. My grandma won't talk about it anymore. She won't even say the word. The sighting happened in August of 2010, just outside Crater Lake National Park. They were camping a few miles off the park boundary, not in a campground, just a pull-off down one of those endless forest roads near Rim Drive. My grandpa said they parked their old camper truck and hiked down into a shallow ravine where they could hear a stream. On the way back up, it happened. They were walking back toward their camp, climbing a gradual slope, when my grandma suddenly stopped and grabbed his arm hard enough that he felt her nails through his jacket. About 50 yards ahead, at the top of a ridge, something was standing there. A large, upright figure. Dark brown or black, easily 8 feet tall, completely still, watching them. It wasn't a bear. That's the first thing he always says. He's a lifelong hunter. He knows what a bear looks like standing up. He said everything about it was off. The arms too long, the shoulders too broad, and the way it stood wasn't like any animal he'd ever seen. Not slouched or shifting its weight like a bear does, just still. The part that stayed with him most was the way it tilted its head slightly, like it was studying them. Too human, but not. That's how he puts it. My grandma started crying quietly and wouldn't look at it. She kept whispering and pleading that they should get out of here. She had a bad feeling about it all. My grandpa says he couldn't move at first. He wasn't afraid, not in a normal way. It was like his brain locked up, like it was trying to reject what his eyes were showing him. He describes it as a cold, pressing feeling at the base of his skull. Then the thing turned, smooth and deliberate, not startled, not hurried. It stepped behind the ridge and disappeared. No sound. No snapping branches, no movement in the brush, just gone. When they got back to the truck, my grandma didn't stop shaking the entire drive home. She refused to talk about what they saw for weeks. Eventually, she stopped acknowledging it altogether. To this day, if anyone brings it up, she avoids the question or leaves the room. My grandpa didn't forget. A few months after it happened, he started digging into what he could find about the area. That's when he discovered that their campsite had been just a few miles from one of the missing 411 cluster zones. Locations where people have vanished in national parks under strange and unexplained circumstances. That's when the binders started. He's got shelves of them now. Maps, sightings, weather reports, Native American accounts, missing persons cases. He's totally convinced there's something in the Southern Cascades that people don't understand or don't want to talk about. They never reported their sighting. My grandpa told a few close friends, but mostly he just researches and watches for patterns. He's not the type to make things up. Retired mechanic, Vietnam vet, no-nonsense guy. But something about what he saw that day broke the way he looks at the world. He still goes back. Same stretch of forest. A couple times a year. Still searching for answers. I'm sharing this because if anyone out there has seen something similar near Crater Lake or in the surrounding forests, I'd like to hear about it. And I think it'd mean something to my grandpa to know he isn't the only one. First time sharing this online, mostly just writing it down to get it out of my head. I don't expect much from it, but maybe it'll sit with someone, the way it sat with me. And just to be clear, I've never been into this stuff. I've spent most of my life actively rolling my eyes at Bigfoot shows, documentaries, sightings, all of it. Tall tales of people wanting to see something that isn't there. I didn't buy into any of it. I still don't, really. What happened to me didn't flip a switch or make me a true believer. I just know what I saw, and for whatever reason, it stuck with me. So, here's the story. It was 1998. I was a 10-year-old kid from Pennsylvania. Up until then, I'd never left the state. I'd never even been on a plane. My world basically ended at the state line. That summer, my mom and grandparents took me along to my cousin's wedding out in Bellingham, Washington. I was excited, mostly because it was the furthest I'd ever been from home. The ceremony was at a golf course north of town. It goes by Shuksan Golf Club now. I don't know if it was called that back then, but I recently checked Google Maps, and the layout is exactly how I remember it. The reception kicked off around dusk. I got bored pretty fast and wandered outside on my own. There was a practice green next to the parking lot out front. Everyone else was on the opposite side of the building, where the actual event was, so it was just me, alone. I was absently rolling a few golf balls around, not really paying attention to much, when something caught the corner of my eye. About 50 to 75 yards away, something walked through a clearing between two dense lines of trees. It was large, upright, covered in dark hair, easily 7 or 8 feet tall. It moved at a steady, even pace, not running, not hunched over, just moving. No clear facial features that I could make out from that distance. I remember standing there staring, not scared, not excited, just locked in, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I wiped my eyes once. Classic kid move, but it didn't change anything. About 5 seconds later, it stepped back into the trees and was gone. I didn't think Bigfoot at the time. Honestly, I didn't think much of anything. I just knew it was something strange, something I couldn't explain. I went back inside and told my grandma what I saw. She looked down at me and smiled, patted my shoulder, and basically wrote it off as me being a bored kid, making things up to get some attention. And that was that. Time passed, and I had forgotten about it. Years later, I was around 17 or 18. I was flipping through channels and stopped on one of those Bigfoot shows. Normally, I wouldn't have given it a second look, but they were showing a breakdown of reported sightings in the US, with a focus on Washington state. They described the typical characteristics: tall figure, dark hair, bipedal, walking smoothly through clearings or tree lines, often spotted at a distance for just a few seconds before disappearing. That landed hard. Every single detail matched what I'd seen, right down to the setting and how brief it was. I sat there for some time after the segment ended, running back over that memory from the golf course. The same size, same color, same gait, same quick, silent disappearance into the trees. And then I realized that weird thing I saw as a kid in Washington all those years ago on the only real trip I'd ever taken out of Pennsylvania was exactly what they were describing. I don't know what I saw. I'm still not a Bigfoot guy. I've got no agenda here and no interest in convincing anyone of anything. But every now and then, it comes back to me clear as day, and I still can't explain it. I don't usually post stuff like this. But I saw this thread and figured I'd share one my parents told me. It stuck with me for years, and even though I wasn't old enough to remember much of it firsthand, I still get chills thinking about it. So I'm 17 now. This happened when I was around 10. We'd just moved to Washington State, Skamania County, near the Gifford-Pinchot Forest. My dad had gotten full custody of me and my little brother after some personal family stuff, and we needed a fresh start. Money was tight, and somehow he found this insanely cheap house, way out in the sticks. It was the kind of cheap that should have set off alarms. Big place, wooded property, long dirt driveway. Weirdly cheap for how big it was. But we needed it, and Dad jumped on it. Turns out, the locals knew something we didn't. We'd only been there a couple weeks when someone at the gas station asked my dad where we'd moved in. When he told them, the guy just blinked and said, "Oh, you moved into that house?" And then walked away like he didn't want to say more. Later, someone else told him a man had died there, alone. Old guy. Had a heart attack after seeing something at his window. No more details, but everyone said it, like it was supposed to mean something. I mean, the house didn't feel haunted or anything. It just felt off. One of the first things we noticed was how quiet everything was. We were basically surrounded by forest, but there were no birds, no squirrels, barely any bugs. I've lived in rural areas before, and it's never silent like that. Just this odd, muffled stillness. Sometimes, right around dusk, there'd be this smell. It was hard to describe. Something between stale, wet carpet and thick, earthy musk. It didn't happen every night, but when it did, it always came just as the light began to fade. Our 2 dogs would go rigid the moment it hit. Ears pinned back, tails low, staring into the tree line like something was standing just beyond the shadows. They were usually loud and energetic, always barking at squirrels, cars, anything. But not during those moments. They never made a sound. That's what freaked my dad out the most. They were completely silent. One night, maybe a month in, my dad was coming home late from work. It was almost dark. His headlights swept across the yard as he pulled in, and he said he saw a man, huge, broad shoulders, run behind the house. But it didn't move like a man. He said it was too fast, too smooth, like it weighed nothing. Just this big shape gliding behind the house and vanishing into the trees. He got out with a tire iron and looked around, but there was nothing there. Just some disturbed dirt near the edge of the yard, and behind him, the soft ticking of the car engine cooling in the night air. Then he noticed it again, that smell. Thick, damp, and musky. A couple of weeks later, the knocks started. It was always from the woods, just after sunset. It was this rhythmic, echoing sound, like 2 massive pieces of wood being slammed together. Not random either, like it had purpose. It would stop and then start again. You could feel it through the ground sometimes, and our dogs, they wouldn't go outside after dark anymore. Then one evening, right before we were going to eat, my dad opened the front door to call the dogs in, and just froze. My stepmom looked past him and screamed. Something was walking away from the yard, back into the trees. Big, covered in hair, tall enough to stoop under the lowest hanging limbs. In its arms, it was carrying something. One of our dogs, just slung over its shoulder like a rag doll. The other dog was found later, wedged under the back steps, shaking, foaming at the mouth. After that, he refused to go near the windows or doors. We had to practically drag him outside just to get him to use the bathroom. As for what happened next, my parents won't say. They've both admitted something else happened a few days later. Something worse. But they won't talk about it. Not to me. Not even to each other. But I do know this. We packed up overnight, didn't finish renovating. left furniture behind. Dad broke the lease and never looked back. To this day, he still refuses to talk about the thing he saw behind the house. He says it wasn't a bear, wasn't a man, just something he had no answer for. I passed through that area once, years later, on a school trip. I didn't say a word, but when the bus turned onto the old road near the house, I started shaking, bad enough that my friend leaned over and asked what was wrong. I told her I get car sick, but I wasn't sick really. I was listening, and all I could think was, what on earth happened there?